The structure of a philosophical essay. An outline of the structure of a philosophical essay. Socrates was no friend of rhetoric as he understood it. Still, he was willing to concede this much. Any discourse ought to be constructed like a living creature with its own body. As it were, it must not lack either head or feet. It must have a middle and extremities so composed as to suit each other and the whole work. To extend the metaphor, just as body parts have different shapes and functions, arms, legs, wings, and horns, essay parts have different forms and functions. Further, just as different animals have different anatomies, philosophical essays have different anatomies. Some are more complex and unusual than others, yet all evolve from a basic form. In this book, the most basic form and its immediate evolutionary descendants will be discussed. These forms all have a head, trunk, and a tail. In prosaic terms, every essay should have three parts: a beginning, a middle, and an end. It was Winston Churchill, I believe, who put it this way: say what you are going to do it, say what you have done. You may have heard this before. For a good reason, it is true. Further, as a first shot at specifying the structure of an essay, it is valuable remark. Yet this truism would be objectionable if more were not said about what goes into the structure of an essay and how a writer might construct one. What is needed is a more informative guide to writing. In the more informative guide, the first element, say what you are going to do, and the third, say what you have done, are substantially unchanged. They appear below as segment 1 and 5. The second element, do it, however, divides into three segments, 2 to 4. The structure of a philosophical essay, a simple one. First, state the proposition to be proved. Second, give the argument for that proposition. Third, show that the argument is valid. 4. Show that the premises are true. 5. State the upshot of what has been proven. Segment 1, stating the proposition to be proved, is the beginning of the essay. The statement to be proved is often called the thesis sentence, or more simply, the thesis. The thesis might be a statement like justice is rendering each person what is due to him, or it might be a historical thesis like Descartes' method of doubt is the same as skepticism. Aristotle said a speech has two parts. You must state your thesis and you must prove it. Although an essay is not exactly a written speech, what Aristotle says about a speech can be applied to an essay. The most basic division of an essay is into a statement of the thesis and its proof. The statement of the thesis comes before the proof. If you begin your essay with your first premise rather than with a statement of your thesis, the reader will have great difficulty in understanding the relevance of the premise. One reason for this is that from any proposition, an infinite number of propositions follows. It is easy but not relevant here to prove this. Anyone who has taken a course in logic should be able to do it. Those without a course in logic might ask their professor some rainy day to do it. Although virtually all of the infinite possible propositions will have an absurdly low probability of being drawn by the author. Often there will still be a relatively large number of propositions that have a relatively high probability of being drawn, and it is unfair and irrational for an author to expect the reader to anticipate which of these she might draw. Compare writing an essay with writing in an automobile. If a passenger does not know the destination, it will be difficult for him to remember the roads he has taken. If, on the other hand, the destination is known, then every left and right turn, every sign and traffic signal is organized in relation to that destination. Since philosophy can be difficult, it is important to make as clear as possible what you are trying to prove in your essay. There should be no surprises in philosophy, except those caused by an insight expressed with brilliant clarity. Do not confuse rhetorical pyrotechnics for philosophical light. Of course, your principal purpose in writing a philosophical essay is truth for truth's sake. Another purpose, however, may be to show your professor that you know the material. Before reading your essay, your professor will assume neither that you do not know the material. But once he does begin reading it, the burden of proof is on you to show that you do know the material. An unclear essay is evidence of unclear thought. Segment 2 to 4 constitute the middle of the essay. Concerning segment 2, it is good practice to get out all of your premises as soon as possible. This gives the reader the opportunity to see the general structure of your argument. The reader has a chance to see the overall picture of how you are going to get to your thesis. Then, segment 3 show your argument to be valid. That is, the premises you have set out will in fact get you to your conclusion. Explain how your premises entail your conclusion. Since a valid argument guarantees a true conclusion only if all the premises are true, the next step in your essay, segment 4, is to prove that your premises are true. First, state your evidence for your premises. This is the most direct and straightforward way of pressing your case. Typically, your audience will be more or less dubious about one or more of your premises, raising the objections that you anticipate your reader might have will help clear the air of that doubt if you can answer those objections. More answering the objections will solidify your case and make it more compelling for your reader. Segment 5 is the end of your essay. There are several ways to end an essay. One way is to summarize your argument. This is in line with the notion say what you have done. Because it comes at the end of your careful explication, your summary can assume a lot. You may use technical terms freely and assume that the meanings of your propositions are clear. Another way to end an essay is to explain what further implication it has, or you might say what the next step in your research is. This last conclusion is ill advised if you are submitting your final essay for a course. Still, another way to end an essay is to explain why your results are important, if their importance could not be appreciated by stating them earlier in the essay. Typically, you should explain why your results are important near the beginning of your essay in order to pique your reader's interest. Sometimes, however, the importance cannot be appreciated before one goes through the argument, or the relation between the results and the importance is impossible without the argument. In these cases, it is both justified and advisable to explain the importance of your results at the end. I have briefly described the simplest structure a philosophical essay can have. Typically, the structure of a philosophical essay will be much more complicated. To help reflect this additional complication, let's look at a more complicated outline of the structure of a philosophical essay. The structure of a philosophical essay, a slightly more complex one. Beginning state, be, the state the proposition to be proved. Orientation, specify what general topic will be discussed. Report what previous philosophers have thought about this topic. State what is to be proved. State the thesis. Report who has held the same or a similar view. Report who has held the opposite or a different view. Motivation, explain why this thesis or topic is interesting or important. State what you will assume in your essay without argument. Give the argument for the proposition to be proved. Explain the general force of the argument. Explain what the premises mean. Show that the argument is valid. Explain those terms that are used in a technical sense or which are ambiguous. Resolve the ambiguity. Explain how the conclusion follows from the premises. The inference to intermediate conclusions will have to be explained as part of the complete explanation. Sometimes one can explain the inferences by citing rules from natural deduction system, example, modus ponens or modus tollens. More often, the explanation concerns explaining the conceptual relations between the concepts expressed in the premises. Give the rules that justify the inferences that are not apparent from the initial statement of the argument. Show that the premises are true. Give the evidence for the premises. Explain the premises and explain the meaning of those terms that might be misunderstood and which bear upon the truth of your premises. Adduce the intuitions of the audience, supply examples and subsidiary arguments that lend support to the truth of your premises. Raise objections that have actually been raised against your position. Raise the objection that historically significant philosophers have already raised to that problem. Raise the objection that your professor or fellow students have raised. Raise objection that no one else has raised and which, when answered, further explicate and shore up your thesis. Answer the objections. Conclusion state the upshot of what you have proven, indicate further results that one might try to get. The outline is in large part self explanatory. Still, other things need to be said about it, since it is an abstract and schematic entity. First, not every essay will contain every element of the outline. Second, not every essay will contain these elements in the order in which they are given here. The order given is a standard order, but it should not be considered invariable. Your material should dictate the order. Third, some items in the outline are roughly the same. Example, IA2 and IV1. One reason for this is that essays typically unfold one step at a time. It is often rhetorically more effective to follow this procedure. Provide some general background and state your own position, then provide more detailed background and so on. Another reason why the same general topic is listed in more than one place in the outline is again that your material should dictate your order, and sometimes that means discussing a topic in one place and sometimes in another. Finally, parts of this outline, even the whole of it, can be embedded as subordinate elements within other parts of the outline. For example, at the beginning of an essay, in the course of explaining what previous philosophers have thought about this problem, you might want to introduce the argument that some other philosopher gives for his position. In other words, you would want to introduce segments 2 to 4 of the outline as an element subordinate to IA2. If you were to do this, then the outline for the early part of your essay would contain embedded elements. Of course, this kind of embedding can occur at almost any other place in your essay, and it can occur an indefinite number of times, even with one embedding within another. For example, for segment 4, show that the premises are true. The truth of some premise may depend upon some argument that contains a premise that itself depends upon some argument that needs to be explained. So one will need to revert to segments 2 to 4 as many times as is necessary to explicate each premise. Although it may seem complicated to have several embeddings, in fact, it is not. The human brain is quite capable of multiple embedding of types. If you signal each successive embedding for your readers, they will not be confused by the apparent complexity. The basic outline suggests that a philosophical essay contains only one argument. This is not correct, as we just saw in discussing the need for embedded arguments in supporting one's premises. Furthermore, though an essay might have one main argument, most essays contain other subordinate arguments which will relate to the thesis in various ways. The author will subscribe to some of these arguments, but in many cases, she will merely be reporting arguments of those opposed to her view or flawed arguments made by those who will have supported her main thesis. In writing your own essay, you should attempt to show your opponent's view to be faulty while overcoming the problems of previous arguments in support of your thesis. Beginning, state the proposition to be proved. Orientation, specify what general topic will be discussed. Report what previous philosophers have thought about this topic. Given the argument for the proposition to be proved, show that the argument is valid. Explain those terms that are used in a technical sense or which are ambiguous. Resolve the ambiguity. Give the rules that justify the inferences that are not apparent from the initial statement of the argument. Show that the premises are true. State what is to be proved. State your thesis. Report who has held the same or a similar view. Report who has held the opposite or a different view. Motivation, explain why this thesis is interesting or important. Give the argument for the proposition to be proved. Show that the argument is valid. Show that the premises are true. Conclusion. Anatomy of an essay. Printed below is a simple essay, Hobbes' Divine Command Theory of Morality, which illustrates most items in the structure of a philosophical essay discussed in the previous section. Passages within the text have been numbered 1 to 22 as references to the commentary provided below the text of the essay. For best results in using the commentary, skim the entire essay first. Then return to the beginning of the essay, read each numbered item and the accompanying footnote. Hobbes' Divine Command Theory of Morality. The central problem in Thomas Hobbes' moral philosophy is answering the question, Why are humans obliged to follow the moral laws? The title is an extremely important part of an essay because if it is aptly formulated, it helps to satisfy the two most important parts of the beginning of an essay. Since the title is always the first thing a reader sees, even before the author's name, it creates a first impression. The title should convey a narrow range of topics from which the actual topic is selected. This delimitation this delimitation of the range orients the reader. The title, Hobbes' Divine Command Theory of Morality, obviously indicates that the main topic of discussion will not include elements or geological ages. It restricts the topic to the intersection of topics about Hobbes and the Divine Command Theory of Morality. Of course, understanding the title also relies upon a great deal of background information. The title is more informative to someone who knows who Hobbes is and what the divine command theory of morality is. The first sentence must effect a transition from the abstractness and sketchiness of the title to the correct concreteness and specificity of the essay itself. The, the first sentence must effect a transition from the abstractness and sketchiness of the title to the concreteness and specificity of the essay itself. The transition is very smooth in this essay since the phrase Hobbes' moral philosophy in the first sentence echoes to the key words in the title. Item 2 satisfy one specify what general topic will be discussed. There are two basic ways of interpreting Hobbes' answer to this question. One interpretation is that humans must obey moral laws because God commands them to obey. This is generally known as the Taylor-Warner thesis. The other interpretation is that humans must obey moral laws because these laws are rational in the sense that they are deducible by reason. This might be called the secular thesis. In this essay, I present an interpretation that is a version of the Taylor-Warner thesis. This sentence introduces report what previous philosophers have thought about this topic. Item 3 is also proleptic. That is, it sets forth in a general way something that needs to be related in detail. Proleptic sentences are like implicit promises to say more about the topic. Such promises need to be kept as soon as possible. In this case, the promise is kept in the sentences immediately following. This sentence is the first part of specifying the claim made in 3. This sentence names the interpretation referred to in 4. It would be appropriate to introduce a note here that would give reference to the scholarly work of Taylor Warner and any other scholar the author thinks provides relevant background to the issue. Such a note is not provided here for simplicity's sake. Item 5 also marks the place where a discussion of the work of Taylor and Warner could be inserted if the author wanted to expand the essay. For example, sentence could easily be expanded into 3. This is generally known as the uh, Taylor first presented the thesis in these words. I can only make hope statement consist with one another by supposing that he meant quite seriously what he is of so often says that the natural law is a command of God and so to be beyond because it's God's command. These 3 sentences could be further expanded into a dozen or more if needed or desired, preferably by describing their views rather than by quoting them. Quoting or otherwise indicating what scholars have thought about some philosophical view provides background for the ideal reader and evidence for your professor that you have done research on and are well informed about your topic. There are many other places in this essay that could be expanded in various ways. Its claim is that according to Hobbes, an action is moral when God commands it, but my interpretation also incorporates the main feature of the secular thesis. Since what God commands is deducible by reason, Hobbes often asserts that moral laws, which he identifies with dictates of reason, are divine laws. He also says the word of God is then also to be taken for the dictates of reason and equity. From the many passages that could be cited, it is clear that Hobbes' adherence to this doctrine is genuine. It was not asserted only once or half heartedly. The view that the moral laws must be obeyed because they are commanded by God can also be proven by an argument that Hobbes has to accept. Moral laws are laws. All laws require a lawgiver. There is no lawgiver for moral law other than God. Therefore, God is the lawgiver of moral law. One objection to my thesis is that Hobbes makes no appeal to God when he deduces the moral laws. My reply to this objection is that it is not necessary for Hobbes to mention God in the deduction of the moral laws. Another essay. There is no need to follow the outline structure that I have given. Here is a well structured essay that does not tightly fit the structure of philosophical essay. Comments are in footnotes in order to avoid having them confused with the number, propositions, and the great fear and ignorance argument.